Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at the history of Curtiss-Wright, the company with quite a legacy. So, the roots of this company begin with three people, whose names you may likely know: Wilbur Wright, Orville Wright, and Glenn Curtiss. As you may already know, the Wright brothers were the first to achieve flight in 1903. They later went on to perfect their design to a point where they could sustain flights of 12 miles an hour. But sadly, in 1905, when the brothers offered their invention to the United States Army, it was rejected without any consideration. Then in 1909, the first great international aviation meet was held in Reims, France. The brothers were sure of victory, and entered three planes in hopes of dominating the event. However, a young unknown won the competition. His name was Glenn Curtiss. As a result of Glenn Curtiss's early success, the Curtiss Airplane and Motor Company became the largest aircraft manufacturer in the world during World War I, and went public in 1916 with Curtiss as president. Curtiss had become the world's largest aviation company, employing 18,000 at its Buffalo facility and 3,000 at Hammondsport, New York location. They produced 10,000 aircraft during World War I, more than 100 in a single week. The First World War had greatly accelerated the pace of airplane development worldwide. Speed, range, and reliability constantly increased together, with new emerging technologies and aerodynamics that would guide airplane development even further. The Wright brothers were pursuing their own interests with their company Wright Aeronautical. However, when Wright Aeronautical was incorporated in 1919, the brothers were no longer involved in the company. Wilbur had passed away, and Orville had other interests. But the company continued the engine tradition that began with the brothers' first engine in 1903. Most engines of the period were water-cooled and suffered frequent cooling system failures. Radiators came apart, porous engine castings, lines, hoses, and gaskets leaked. Failure rates were of great concern, particularly to the Navy, where over-water flying was more hazardous. Wright did some work with air-cooled engines for the Army, but success came when the company developed a relationship with Charles J. Lawrence. After purchasing the Lawrence Aero Engine Corporation, Wright Aeronautical was able to successfully design and build the J-5C Whirlwind. It had 9 cylinders, was light at 510 pounds, had no water cooling, and it was simple and easily maintained. The Whirlwind developed 220 horsepower at 1800 RPM, a low speed that contributed to its reliability. The engine and the company made history when it was used in the first non-stop flight across the Atlantic Ocean. As a result of the successes of the pioneers of the aviation industry, Curtiss-Wright Corporation was formed from the merger of 12 Wright and Curtiss affiliated companies on June 5, 1929. On August 22nd of the same year, the Curtiss-Wright Corporation was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, where it still trades today. Curtiss-Wright pioneered many innovations, such as forged aluminum pistons, the dynamic damper which absorbed crankshaft vibration, thin cylinder heads for cooling, and greatly improved wear resistance. Curtiss-Wright pioneered the concepts of air-cooled engines as well as the radial engine. By the end of the decade, Curtiss-Wright engineers had pushed output per engine above the 1,000 horsepower mark. Then, in 1934, Curtiss-Wright was chosen to build the 9-cylinder radial engines for the 4-engine Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. And then in 1936, Curtiss-Wright became involved in some shady activities and was charged with conspiring to sell 15 machine guns to Bolivia, which was engaged in an armed conflict in the Chaco. This violated a joint resolution of Congress and a proclamation issued by President Roosevelt. This later went into a Supreme Court battle in United States versus Curtiss-Wright Export Corporation, and the case involved principles of both governmental regulation of business and the supremacy of the executive branch of the federal government to conduct foreign affairs. The Curtiss-Wright Corporation lost the battle. But then, after the case, in 1937, the Curtiss P-36 Hawk fighter plane was developed, tested, and accepted by the United States Army. It resulted in the largest peacetime aircraft order ever given by the Army Air Corps. Perhaps a bit of foreshadowing there. So as the war clouds formed in Europe, the armed forces of the United States began to accelerate defense preparations, and Curtiss-Wright played a major part in the production of armaments for the war effort. Curtiss-Wright's incredible record of mass production, scale-up, and management during the Second World War is a matter of documented history. In 1940, Curtiss-Wright introduced the famous P-40 Warhawk, which through December 1944 was to have a production run of 13,738 planes and serve with distinction in the air forces of 28 nations during World War II. Curtiss-Wright's aggregate war score was 142,840 aircraft engines, 146,468 electric propellers, and 29,269 airplanes, which included the Curtiss Commando Transport and Navy Dive Bomber. By the time of the war's end in 1945, Curtiss-Wright was the second largest company in the United States, but this wasn't going to last. Curtiss-Wright had failed the transition to design and produce jet aircraft, despite several attempts. During the war, the company had only expended small amounts of aircraft research and development, instead concentrating on incremental improvements in conventional aircraft already in wartime production. On top of that, demand for military equipment collapsed after the Second World War. As well as trying to pursue engine development, the company attempted to diversify itself by entering many different industries, including developments into the plastic industry as a manufacturer of plastics used for industrial, household, and personal products. The company also developed an electronics business segment and produced military nuclear rod control equipment. Other businesses included automotive components, heavy earth moving equipment, a metal extrusion facility, and the distribution of Mercedes-Benz automobiles in the United States. The shift of civilian aircraft to jets left the company with little of its old business, and during the 1960s and further on, it continued to pursue creating components for aircraft and many other types of industrial equipment, including several kinds of valves for industrial applications and parts for nuclear submarines. As time moved on, Curtiss-Wright began to refocus on producing equipment for airplanes. The unprecedented replacement cycle of the world airline industry, coupled with increased traffic growth and new routes, combined to swamp the three major commercial airframe manufacturers, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, and Airbus Industries, with new orders. At the time, Curtiss-Wright supplied actuation and control systems and components to Boeing for the 737, 747, and 757 programs. Currently, while maybe not as much talked about as before, Curtiss-Wright is still a thriving company and comprised of several different divisions, including commercial, industrial, defense, and power segments. And they continue their work in supplying military equipment to the United States and developing parts for airplanes. Well, I hope you learned something in this video. Thanks for watching, and that's the history of Curtiss-Wright, a company that brought forth brilliant new technology and a major supplier to the United States Armed Forces.